I'm going to teach you everything about lighting in Roblox Studio so you can make your games look 100 times better. First, you need to make sure that you can see the properties and explorer windows, which look like this. So the properties window looks like this, and if I select a part here, you can see all the things in it. So that's what the properties looks like, and explorer, it looks like this. These might be combined like this onto the same window, so you'd have to click between them with this little tab selector thing at the bottom of the box. But I recommend just having your properties right here in one tall window and then your explorer right next to it to the right. If you can't see these, make sure to click view and then make sure that properties and explorer are both grayed out in dark here. They're on the very far left of the view tab in Roblox Studio. So make sure both of these are dark gray, and that means that you can see them somewhere on your screen. If you don't, just check all the little tab thingies, as I said, like these, cycle through them and make sure that they are visible. But if you double click these, they should show up somewhere on your screen. Now, lighting is a service that is at the very bottom of Explorer. So if you have a lot of stuff already in Workspace, just go ahead and scroll to the top, close that off by clicking the arrow to the left of it, and lighting will be near the top of Explorer if you close Workspace. Otherwise, it'll be near the bottom. So to see all the properties of lighting, you need to select it. And now we can see all the different details of lighting and all the different things we can change, except for effects, which we'll get to later. So make sure to watch to the end so you don't miss some amazing lighting effects that you can add that honestly make your map look so good. Without these, my builds really wouldn't look that great. Now, the best way to learn what each of these properties does is to just experiment with each one and figure out what looks good on your map specifically. But I'm going to show you guys what each one of these does in order, and I'm going to show you a good way to gauge these and pick a good setting for your map. So the first one is ambient, and this is basically the color of your shadows mostly, but it also kind of affects the rest of your map, especially indoors areas. It kind of just affects the main color that you see. So most change you'll see is in the shadows when we change it. So if we make this lighter, you'll see the shadows get a lot lighter. So I like to have this just kind of balance this out to how dark you'd like your shadows to be. But we are going to be changing some things later that change how the shadows look too. So make sure that you might have to come back to this and change it later once you change other things. But I just like to set this kind of dark. I like my shadows to be very defined. And then I like to have a slight purple glow to it. So this purple glow kind of just makes it look, a lot of builders do this. And you can just kind of pick a nice color that you like. And I think that looks pretty good. So there we go. Now the next one is brightness. This basically changes the brightness of everything that you see except for the shadows. So this doesn't apply a whole haze to your screen like it would in the settings of a video game, but this actually will change how bright the sunlight is on your map mostly. So if we go ahead and change this, we can see what it does. So as you can see, it's changing how the light hits, but it does not change the brightness of the shadows at all, really. So what I like to do is I like to set this basically as high as I can without making things look too shiny. Sometimes if you have white on your avatar and this is up too high, it'll make that start to glow, but I'm going to show you guys a way to fix that later in this video. So go ahead and set it pretty much as high as you want. I just wouldn't put this all the way to 10. I'd probably keep it under around 4 just to be safe. So I'm going to do 3.3. All right, so next is color shift. These two properties, they don't really do much. So what I like to do for color shift bottom is just leave it. And on color shift top, we can actually add a slight bit of yellow. And what this does is it just kind of adds a little bit of a yellow glow to your map, kind of like real life. Just ever so slightly, it makes it a little bit more realistic and just brighter looking. I don't know exactly what it does, but adding a slight yellow glow to color shift top will kind of improve things. Makes it look a bit more realistic. All right, and now is diffuse and specular, which both of these just affect how much everything kind of reflects the sky, and it adds a bit of a blue tint, or whatever color your sky is affected based on that. So it adds a bit of a reflection to different things, and it makes it look a whole lot more realistic. Now, most people don't really do this on low poly maps, but I actually really like it. I would tone it down a little bit. On the default new base plate, it does have it pretty high at 1, so I wouldn't have that all the way at 1 necessarily. I'd probably turn specular down to around 0.6, and diffuse, I'd put that at about 0.7. Already, this is actually looking quite a bit better. Now, next is global shadows. All this does is it turns off basically all the shadows in your game or on. Turning this off can improve performance, but you can add a UI to your game that lets players turn this off on their own, but it's really up to you if you want to have this off or on. If you have a lot of objects in your game, the best way to do it, in my opinion, is just to leave it on and turn off shadow for as many things as possible that don't need it. Now, next is outdoor ambient. And outdoor ambient basically is really similar to the other ambient. Basically, it doesn't affect the shadows so much, but it affects how the outdoors look in your game in general. So for this, I generally usually leave this just how it is, but if you want, you can use this to add a bit of a change to the general color of the outdoors in your map, and maybe we'll add a slight bit of orange to that, just a little bit, not much. Now that did make things a lot brighter. I'm not really sure if I want that. Yeah, I'm gonna undo that, but you guys can change it if you want. It's really up to you. Lighting is all about adjusting things how you want in your map. So next is shadow softness. So shadow softness basically affects how crisp the edges of your shadows are. And if we turn this all the way down, you'll see that it gets very, very jaggedy. Basically, there's a certain minimum point where it won't look so jaggedy. And I would say the minimum you want to have it at is around 0.12, which is where it starts to get not so jaggedy, and it's like the crispest you can have it without it getting so jaggedy. You might be fine at 0.08 or so, but anything below that just looks way too jaggedy. But depending on how cartoony you want your map to look, you can turn this up. More soft shadows make it more cartoony. Now next is the lighting technology. What lighting technology does is it lets you choose the mode of lighting in your map. So shadow map is the default, and honestly, it's what I recommend using. Shadow map has pretty much everything you need. It has the very nice shadows. Everything else about it is pretty nice also. But there is also future, which is just an upgraded version of shadow map. You won't notice much difference on future, but it can add a lot of lag to your map if you have a lot of lights and parts. But basically what future does is it adds a really unique reflection to part when you have a light above them, especially indoors. It doesn't always affect it, but it will add a bit more detail to your lights, and a lot of parts and a lot of lights will mean a lot more lag on your map if you have future enabled. Compatibility is like classic lighting. It's very gray and dull. This is the most performant one, but it's not that much better than voxel. It also has very smooth shadows, as you can see. So voxel is basically the upgraded version of compatibility. It has the very soft shadows, so if you want the most cartoony look, this is the one to go for. But just like compatibility, it makes everything just slightly more dull, so you will have to change all of the color settings again for your map if you choose to change this. Now, I'm going to leave this at shadow map since that's honestly my favorite, most balanced mode, and it just looks very nice on most maps, and it's pretty well performant. All right, next, archivable basically saves whether or not you change anything. Do not turn this off or on anything. It'll screw things up in Roblox Studio usually. Unless you know what you're doing, I wouldn't change that. Clock time basically changes where the sun is in the sky. That's about it, like what time of day it is. So if I turn this down, it'll be much earlier in the day. It'll be nighttime. But you can adjust this just to make it look as good as possible, or you can set up a day-night cycle script in your game, which you can find those in the toolbox if you don't know how to script. They're pretty easy to find. Just watch out for viruses. I think honestly that looks really good because of the way that the sun hits the waterfall and everything. Now, geographic latitude, it lets you adjust basically where you are in the world. So just like real life, there's different time zones and stuff. So this will basically change the location of the sun in different ways. And this can really change the way things look a lot. So you can have stars during daytime with this kind of. And it's just a really interesting feature. I don't really tend to use it that much, but it can be pretty cool. Now, if you guys want a better way to change the location of the sun in the sky, I highly recommend getting the Set Sun plugin. So what this does is it lets you basically just drag around the sun, which is much better than dragging these dumb sliders. You can actually move the sun wherever you want it. Now, I think that is a very good spot. I think I'm going to leave it at that. It looks beautiful right there. Looks very realistic, very, very amazing right there. Now, to get this plugin, I have a link in the description for it. It is not in the plugin library, so you're gonna have to use the link in the description to get to it. Now, I do need to actually point out that you need to have your studio graphics up to see most of these changes in Studio. So go to File, Studio Settings, Rendering, and then Editor Quality Level, and change that all the way up. Now, if your computer slows down a lot when you do this, turn it down to the highest level where it still works well. So for example, if it was not good on 21, you could turn it down to like 14. And if that is better, then that is going to be good enough. But make sure that you're in a simple place to work on your lighting. If you're working on your whole game with thousands of parts in it and you're trying to edit it, that would be part of the reason why turning up the editor quality level would slow it down. So you want to make sure that you move over to a place that is simpler to work on your lighting, and then just move it all over, copy it all over to your other place once you are done setting up the lighting. So I'm gonna set this right back to level 21. All right, so the last setting on our list is exposure compensation. And what this does is it basically is just very similar to brightness, except it changes the brightness of everything. And it's very direct on the lighting. And I like to turn this up just slightly on my maps just to give everything a little bit more brightness to it. Looks very nice with that added on. About 0.31 is what I'm gonna do. All right, now in lighting, you can also add in different cool effects that will add extra customization to your lighting. And on the new Roblox baseplate, by the way, it comes with default lighting effects that are okay, but really not that well set up. That's why this map already had some effects on it. To see the effects that are already in your map, go ahead and open up lighting with this little arrow, and we can see all the effects that are in your map. So I'm just gonna, to get a clean slate, I'm gonna delete everything except for sky by holding Control and just selecting each thing. And there we go. So to add a new effect, we just have to hover over the lighting service and click this white plus right here. And most of them will show up at the top here, but for some reason, not all of them show up. So you're gonna have to search for effect to see some of these, but that's okay. I'll let you guys know when we have to do that. So first is color correction effect. So what color correction effect does is it lets you add all kinds of modifications to the color and saturation of your map and the overall vibrance. I use this to crank up the colors in my map and make it look extra cartoony and bright. I've seen a lot of games use this for filters and effects like black and white too, but the saturation improves the darks and lights of your colors, making them stronger and just making everything more crisp and defined. So I highly recommend turning up the saturation right here just a little bit, especially if you have a cartoony map. If you have a more realistic map, you might actually benefit from turning this down, but I'm gonna turn this up to 0.2. Now, as you can see, the colors really pop now after doing that. So contrast will change the darks and lights of your colors, and it'll just make everything more crisp and defined. So I'm going to turn that up to around 0.04. Now, as you can see, all the colors and darks and shadows are much stronger and just more crisp and defined. All right, so brightness is another way to change the brightness of the map, but this changes the screen's brightness rather than the actual environment's brightness. So as you can see, it doesn't add glow to anything, so all it does is just adds a tint to your map, and it doesn't affect lighting the same way that the other properties that affect brightness do, if that makes sense. So I usually change this slightly if it helps by turning it up like by 0.2 or 0.3, but otherwise after that, it's really not that useful unless you're scripting and using this for something very specific. Now, I do want to mention you can actually have multiple color correction effects if you want to layer on effects, or if it's not enough for you for some reason, but that is there if you need it. All right, next is the bloom effect. Gonna go ahead and add this by clicking the white plus again and going down to the bloom effect and selecting it so I can see the properties. All right, so bloom basically increases or decreases the bloom or glow you see around objects that have a bright sun reflection on it, or if it has neon material. So if we go into the cave right here and we see these different crystals I have, which are not good crystals, they're just wedges, but it's not really necessary to use this effect unless the settings that you already have are screwing up the bloom on everything so that your map is glowing, or if neon is just way too strong for you as it is on most of your part. But otherwise, I don't really recommend using it. The intensity will just turn down the intensity of the bloom, or turn it up. So turning this down slightly can make it look a little bit better if you don't like it so bright. And then the size will just change the size of the effect that you see on your screen. And it can look pretty nice to actually turn up the size. And threshold basically takes the minimum brightness of a surface to show bloom on it. So if we turn this down all the way, you'll see that the sky gets very, very bright and it has bloom on it. And we do not want this. So you want to have this high enough where things are not starting to get bloom when you don't want them to. And by the way, if you don't know, bloom is just the glow effect around an object. So I'm going to delete my bloom effect since I really don't need it, but you might have a use for it at some point in the future. Next is blur effect, which basically is not that useful for your default lighting. It just smothers everything and makes it look bad. The only time when it's useful is if you want to open a GUI and show blur in the background, or for other effects involving UI, but otherwise I really don't recommend using it unless you need it. So as you can see, everything's just blurry, and I don't want that on my map. Some people turn this down really low and they're like, oh yeah, that looks good. But really, it looks like I have bad vision or something. I just don't like it. So don't use blur, in my opinion. All right, so next is depth of field. So we're gonna have to search for this one. So just type in effect and you will see depth of field in here. So depth of field right there. Just go ahead and click that to add it. And what depth of field does is it will let you make things in the distance blurry, which will make your map look more realistic. But I just wouldn't have it too strong because it makes it look terrible. And I've seen some people misuse this feature and it's just not good. So by default, this looks really blurry. And to fix that, you can just turn up the focus distance, turn the near intensity to 0, and turn up the in focus radius. Honestly, just turn up the focus distance and in focus radius as high as possible. And then the far intensity, for some reason, it doesn't work that well. So like if it's over a certain number, it will get more blurry, and if it's under a certain number, it'll be less blurry. So I don't really recommend using this in most cases unless you have a huge map, so I'm gonna remove this. All right, next is a really good effect. I know we've been having a lot of bad effects all in a row, but trust me, this one is good. So sun rays. Sun rays effect will, whoa, there you go. See, it adds sun rays. It adds lines of light coming from the sun, and this can be blocked by trees and things. So if I move behind this tree, they'll be hidden. There are some properties on this. So if we go ahead and select sun rays, we can go ahead and see what it does. So if we turn down the intensity, it'll just make it a lot less bright. And if we turn down the spread, it basically just changes the size. I recommend just experimenting this, finding out what looks best on your map. I like to have it pretty high on the spread and pretty low on the intensity. So something like that usually looks pretty good. All right, so the next effect is called atmosphere, and this is an advanced kind of fog. Oh, and I forgot to show you guys fog in the lighting properties. I'll show you guys that first. After that, we'll get to atmosphere, which is incredible. So fog, basically the reason why I couldn't show you this before is because when there is an atmosphere already in the map, you will not be able to change the fog. When we don't have an atmosphere, we can change it. So fog is exactly as it says, and we can change the radius of the fog. So by default, it's very high, so you aren't going to be able to see it. I like to turn this down to something near 1,000, and then I just change it as I need it. So if it's too close, then you just turn it up to 2,000, maybe 3,000. And it's a good idea usually to make this the color of your sky. But the main problem that fog has is, yes, it will look amazing right now during the day, but by the time we turn it to night, it is not going to match the sky. Now this can give you, if this is what you want it to look like, it's nice, but the nice thing about atmosphere is it will match the sky at all times of day, and you don't have to change the color manually. So I recommend messing around with the distance on that if you want to use fog, but I really would not recommend it after Roblox has already added atmosphere, which is way better. If you test it out and it's a lot laggier on your computer, I guess that's a good reason to use fog. But in general, I don't think atmosphere adds that much more lag. So I'm going to go ahead and click the plus and add atmosphere in here. And as you can see, atmosphere, it is based on the color of the sky all the way around. So as you can see, it gets more white as it goes down, just like my sky. Now, if we select atmosphere, we can see all the properties. So we have a density property, which will change the distance you have it visible. Offset basically will just kind of change like where it's visible, so it'll be less strong directly in front of you. If you turn that up, it'll be spread out more or something like that. I don't know exactly what it does, but yeah, just experiment with this and find the best look for your map. Now, the other properties down here are a little bit harder to explain, but basically we can add a haze to this. And with the haze, it will kind of add like this nuclear wasteland effect to it. Change the color of this, we can choose the color property right here by clicking the square there. Let me just drag this over here. And we can change the color of the haze. Now, there aren't that many times when you're really going to want to use haze. However, it does look really nice in the mornings in your map. So it does look nice when you have a day-night cycle and you want to have it kind of change and show the fog in a really advanced way. Now, glare will just add a glow to that haze. So as you can see, it'll add a bit of a glow. And we can also change the color of the glow by changing the decay property. Now, I usually like to have this kind of orange. So I actually kind of like how the haze looks on this map. So I'm going to leave it on, actually. Next is clouds. So clouds is an effect that does not actually go under lighting. It goes under terrain. And terrain, if you don't know where it is, we just have to go to the very top of workspace. So it's in the workspace service. And if we go ahead and open up workspace, we will see it at the very top If it isn't there, you're gonna have to scroll with this thingy all the way to the top. And to change the properties of terrain, we can click on this, of course. And by the way, I do recommend turning on decoration because it does look nice with lighting, but it adds grass blades if you don't know how to do that. But anyways, to add clouds, we're gonna go ahead and click the plus and type in clouds. Now these clouds look amazing. They move and they're just really realistic. They add a ton to your maps. If we select the clouds, we can actually see the properties of this. So at the very bottom, we can change the color. And honestly, I kind of recommend just leaving this as it is. But if you want, you could make your clouds more yellow or red even. So I guess I'll make mine a little bit more orange. So what the cover does is it changes how much of the sky that your clouds cover. So if we turn it all the way up, it'll be very, very covered. So it'll be like a fully cloudy day. And if we turn this to around like 0.5, it'll be partly cloudy. And generally, I just like to turn the cover up pretty high. And then what density does is it turns down how strong the clouds are, and it makes it kind of fade a little bit more. And so what I like to do, that's why I like to have the cover up, because then I can have some very faded clouds. So there's lots of clouds, but they're very faded. Oh, and also, I didn't mention, but this also affects the sun rays and it adds a really cool effect to them. Makes them even more realistic. All right, so for this map, I think that looks pretty good. Just minimal cloud. Now, honestly, clouds is probably my favorite effect out of all of these. It looks absolutely incredible, and I'm amazed that this is even possible on Roblox, because usually we don't get nice features like this. It's like something you see in Unreal Engine. But now, lighting is just one piece of the puzzle for making amazing builds. And if you want more advice on how to make your builds incredible, click the video that's on screen to see the crucial advice on exactly how the best builders on Roblox come up with ideas fast for their build. You are not going to want to miss this. See you guys there.